So that's how your rights came into existence. They're built on the backs of these guilty people. And eventually some reviewing court goes, look, we know the guy's guilty, right? Fine, stipulated, but you still can't do this extra thing to get that evidence, because then that puts us all at risk, right?
Hello and welcome to the Attorney Post, where we bring you the inside baseball scoop from top legal experts across the country. I'm your host, Justin West. All right, and here we go again. Welcome back, everybody, to the Attorney Post, where we discuss what's going on with various facets of the law with lawyers at the top of their game to help you navigate the ins and outs of the various legal fields and jurisdictions out there. Because, as I always say, if you don't know your rights, you don't have any. Today, I'm joined with Austin Lux. He runs the eponymous Lux Law Firm out in Colorado Springs. He does a lot of criminal defense stuff. Austin, how are you doing today, man?
Hey, doing well. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely, my pleasure. Let's jump over here as always and take a look. This is Austin's website, link in the description down below. That is the luxlawfirm.com, link in the description below. You can also give him a call for a free consultation at 719-496-2177. That will also be in the description below, and wherever else you happen to find this, it'll be there as well. Before we get into this, as always, we're going to jump over and read from a couple of our sponsors. Our first sponsor is nationalerc.org. You may have noticed the world went through a pandemic and many businesses were forced to shut down and reduce their hours, add supply chain interruptions, and ultimately suffered from reduced revenue in 2020 and 2021. What you may not know is that the Congress recently passed the CARES Act, which allocated about $400 billion in stimulus funds set aside for small businesses. And this is money that never needs to be paid back. This is not a loan like the PPP or Paycheck Protection Program. This is essentially free money that your business is owed by the government. It's a retroactive tax credit, and it can be spent in any way you want on your business. Right now, nationalerc.org is helping small businesses get the maximum amount of money that they can, and you can calculate and see how much you can get by visiting nationalerc.org and filling out their 9-question survey at the bottom of the page. The average small business that they work with gets over $200,000 to invest in their business that never needs to be repaid. The calculator is free, and there's never any fee unless they secure funding for you. Visit nationalerc.org. Our second sponsor is Groove Funnels or Groove Pages, groove.cm. They keep changing the name, but it's all the same platform. If you love spending $5,000 to build a new website and you love paying $200, $300, $400 a month for hosting and management and security and all that stuff, by all means, keep doing whatever it is that you're doing. But if you're like me, you hate that stuff. And that's why I personally recommend Groove Pages, the all-new, all-in-one website funnel sales platform from internet marketing legend Mike Filsaime. Visit theattorneypost.com/groove to sign up for free and build a complete site at no cost. Literally, really for free. There's no cost, and you can build, I think, actually up to 3 functional websites. And they have a huge list of apps that on the platform that'll turn it into a webinar platform, an affiliate platform, or almost anything you can imagine. Visit theattorneypost.com/groove to get started today. And yes, it really is free. There's no credit card required. This replaces your website builder, replaces your ClickFunnels, replaces your webinar software, and all sorts of stuff. It's a very, very cool platform. And again, free to get started. Obviously, they do have paid upgrades, but that's theattorneypost.com/groove. All right. Well, Austin, thanks for standing by. How are you doing, man?
Hey, I'm doing well.
Awesome. Austin has got a great rig. He's got a great mic and a good backdrop. Clearly, he knows what he's doing. So we'll have some great audio quality on this episode. I always like to see that.
Learned a little bit from the pandemic.
There you go.
Good takeaways.
I say this with everybody, but the reason I rebooted the podcast in the first place was the pandemic, because all of a sudden I used to use Google Hangouts, and all of these attorneys, I had to walk them through how to get it set up and everything else was a pain in the butt. And then all of a sudden, everyone was Zooming everywhere. Everyone who had a Zoom, and like, all right, let's just do Zoom. And they're like, okay, great, let's do Zoom. So now everything is done Zoom. It's great. Austin is an attorney. He's a former prosecutor specializing in criminal defense. He attended law school at the University of Denver, where he focused on litigation and was the assistant editor for the 2016 edition of the Colorado Evidence Courtroom Manual, which is a popular reference manual utilized by judges and practitioners throughout the state. After graduation, he joined Colorado's 4th Judicial District, where he also served as deputy district director, or deputy district attorney. I'm sorry, brain is not wording today. That's okay. During his tenure as the district attorney, he also handled every type of criminal case and spent months out of each year trying cases before a jury. And of course, now he runs his own firm, the Lux Law Firm, theluxlawfirm.com, link in the description below. Question number 1, as always, Austin, what did I miss?
No, you just about got it. We're a small criminal defense firm right across the street from the courthouse and right across the street from my old office where I was a district attorney. It's Colorado Springs, so everything is within about a half a block of each other in the downtown area. So that's all we do is criminal defense. And one of those firms where I handle the cases myself. So people come in and hire me, they actually get me. I handle the case all the way through rather than some kind of associate, but that's all we do is criminal defense.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So let me ask you this. Well, first off, why don't you give me a pitch for your law firm? Obviously, you do lots of different things. Why don't you tell us who your ideal client or clients are, where they come from, how they find you, so on and so forth?
Well, I didn't know what my ideal client would be when I set up my practice. I just knew that I loved criminal law, that was going to be the area that I was going to focus on. But I can tell you who my ideal client has become because they're the people that keep winding up in my office. And it ends up being a lot of times guys with domestic violence charges. I think a big part of that is that Colorado Springs is a huge military community. So we have 5 military bases. It's a significant part of our community. And a lot of times, people get charged with domestic violence or DUIs, and that's become the bulk of my practice. Before I went and set up my own private practice, I was doing a lot of felonies, drug stuff. We were part of the Southern Colorado Drug Task Force, and I spent a lot of my time focusing on that. But a lot of times, that's more of a in custody situation. If somebody gets charged with that big of a crime, they're normally in custody, and so a lot of times those areas end up getting picked up by the public defender. So when I went and started doing private defense work, that's really the people that I found that were in need of legal representation, were people with domestic violence cases and DUIs, and a lot of times military members.
Gotcha. That makes sense. We're going to dig into that a little bit more in a little bit because I've talked to a handful of criminal defense attorneys, and I know that there must be parts of your job that are a joy, or you wouldn't be doing it. But I know there's got to be hard days as well. So we'll dig into that. But what got you into law in the first place, right? So were you the kid, Austin, that just grew up knowing everyone else was playing G.I. Joe and you were playing lawyer, or did you just kind of stumble across maybe I've got an aptitude for law, and then how did you get into criminal law in particular?
Yeah, I guess maybe it's partially there. There's a point in your life when you're a young kid and people tell you, well, gee, you like to argue, that means you should be a lawyer. And, and you believe them when you're a kid, but what they really mean is just stop.
Yeah.
And so that's probably what sent me down that path. I was actually a political science major in my undergrad. And the first political science class I had, went to undergrad in Colorado Springs, University of Colorado Springs. And the first class I had was a class where everybody in there was a political science major, right? So auditorium class, 300 people there. The professor gets up and he tells a joke and he goes, "What do you call a guy with his degree in political science?" Unemployed. He goes, "What?" Because he raised his hand. He goes, "Hey, waiter." It was completely silent. So he just laughed to himself, and everybody was reevaluating their decisions. So it was definitely either law or writing white papers that nobody was ever going to read. So I'm happy I went with law after that.
Actually, I tell the same story. I have degrees in philosophy and history, and I always say it means I'm qualified to ask the deep questions in life, like paper or plastic, or you want fries with that?
That's exactly.
So it's either go that route or start my own company. So I started my own business.
That's a better choice.
So he told you that it's white papers or law or run for office, and you decided I'll do the law thing. So what was your journey into law, and then from law in general, what got you into criminal defense?
Criminal defense, I liked law. I really enjoyed law school, and the way that they teach is different. They use the Socratic method and that kind of stuff. And so it does teach you a different way to think about problems and questions and that kind of stuff. But I started at interning at the district attorney's office my first year in law school. So I basically had that criminal bent to my entire law school trajectory from the beginning. And so when I finished school, I went directly into a job at the district attorney's office, and I'd already been doing trials. Colorado's a great place where you can practice while you're still in school.
Oh, yeah.
And yeah, it's amazing. And, at that time, there was nobody at the 4th Judicial District District Attorney's Office. I only wanted to go here because I'm from here, right? Everybody else wanted to go to Denver and that kind of stuff. So they were in desperate need of people. So I think I did like 10 trials as an intern. Half of them were unsupervised. You're introducing yourself to a jury and you're telling, I don't even have a law license, but I'm going to give it a go. So it was the best place to get experience. And after that, I was in love with doing trial work. So I stuck with that all the way through.
I'm not a lawyer, but I play one on the TV. So.
Yeah. You can play one in real life here too, as long as you got a couple credit hours under you.
That's crazy. I mean, you can self-represent, but that's weird. I was not aware of that before you said that. So that's kind of funny.
Yeah. I think some of my juries in the early days weren't aware of that either. So maybe that's a good thing. I don't know.
I was gonna say, do you think they went easier on you or harder on you?
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, maybe I should have been more upfront about it. Give me a break. It's my first time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, let me ask you this. We obviously just got through with the pandemic. In fact, one of my sponsors, deals with companies that have employees and helps them out with that tax credit. And I've talked to a lot of attorneys across the country, attorneys in different states. Some states were a little more heavy-handed in the way that they approached lockdowns and things. Some states were a little more libertarian in the way they approached law, or the way people could interact and whatnot. How did the pandemic and the response to the pandemic affect you, affect your firm, and affect your clients in the way that you serve them?
Yeah, it was weird. So I started my practice January 2020. So I was, yeah. So I left the DA's office excited to go out and start my own practice. Not knowing 3 months later, everything was going to be shut down. So we had just gotten up and running, and I was doing a little bit of everything like you do when you first start out. I was doing criminal defense and a little bit of family law and that kind of stuff. And it was only after maybe about 2 years that I really honed down on criminal defense. But then everything shut down. And so what ended up happening is the criminal cases that I had, we stopped doing trials for like 2 years. Cases just didn't go to trial. That's weird because in Colorado, we have it's in our constitution that there is a 6-month speedy trial right.
Right.
Well, right? So somebody pleads not guilty, you got to take them to trial within 6 months.
Yeah.
Well, how do you take them to trial in 6 months if you can't impanel a jury, to do the trial in a 2-year period of time? And so when that first happened, a bunch of us on the defense bar, we were thinking that we were going to get these windfalls. You get cases set for trial, you can't go to trial. Benefit goes to the client, like everything in criminal law, right? The benefits are weighed in favor of the defense because they're the ones whose life is on the line. But at the very last minute, I think it was like a month before, like the first cases were going to run up against that 6-month deadline, the Supreme Court that is in charge of the procedural rules. So they can't change the law, right? But they can change the procedural rules. Yeah. They changed the rules around what's known as a mistrial. And so, mistrial, whatever, jury can't come to a verdict, the case gets mistried. Some lawyer screws up, says something the jury's not supposed to know about, case gets mistrialed. It never was meant to include not being able to impanel a jury, but the Supreme Court at the very 11th hour changed the procedural rules to allow a judge to declare a mistrial based on the pandemic. And so then for a 2-year period of time, these cases just kept getting mistried. I mean, 3 or 4 times. I think I had a sex assault case that was mistried twice. And so this guy absolutely wanted to go to trial because he didn't do anything wrong.
Yeah.
And we couldn't get his dang case to go to trial for 2 years. And then, finally we're having trials again. DA dismisses the case right before it. But that's how it affected criminal law, is these cases sat in limbo. Which is fine if your client's out of custody.
I was going to say, what did this do for people that were in custody?
Yeah. I mean, that's the issue, right? If your client's out of custody, then, there's some stigma attached to that. But if it's not a big charge, they can kind of go about their life. If your client's out of custody, in custody rather, then that's an issue, right? Because, they're basically, being held before the punishment's being imposed before a conviction.
Yeah.
A lot of people got out of custody. Judges were pretty good about, understanding that, people in custody were suffering extreme rates of COVID. They weren't being able to exercise their rights. So they were entertaining frequent bond arguments, and they were letting a lot of people out on lower bonds than they otherwise would have. But some people with some judges just got screwed, man. There's no way around it, right? They just sat in custody for 2 years with no chance of going to trial and vindicating their rights. And that's, there's been no recourse for it.
I was going to say, is there anything coming down the pipeline to help them out, or
no? They've tried
them?
they've tried to appeal it, and the mistrial change and that kind of stuff, and no luck. So as long as the judges were applying the mistrial rules correctly, which is different because it's a weird thing on how you calculate speedy. It's actually kind of a complicated math problem, and lawyers hate math. So
yeah,
a lot of judges
I didn't get into a lot of math.
Yeah, exactly. But as long as they were doing the math correctly, then no. Yeah, there's no recourse for those folks.
Yeah, that's frustrating.
Yeah.
That's
right.
Absolutely. I'm wondering if that's going to eventually move itself up to the Colorado Supreme Court, or even, I don't know if that could make it to the US Supreme Court, but that strikes me as an unfair detention. But you're the attorney, not me.
Well, Supreme Court put the rules in place, so I don't think they'll touch it. But maybe the higher, or at least the Colorado Supreme Court put the rules in place. So yeah. I don't know. Yeah, maybe some of the higher court.
If the Supreme Court's like, nah, we were wrong. Sorry.
Yeah. They don't admit that a lot. You got to wait for a whole new batch of judges.
There you go.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, so you've been practicing on your own for a couple of years, and I'm sure you've had, especially in the midst of COVID, you've had some successes, you've had some failures. One of my favorite questions, because I really like to, I think you can tell a lot about somebody by the way they handle success and the way they handle failure. And I said this in the pre-roll, my listeners know I say this all the time, but I'm a firm believer that, it's never a loss really, as long as you can learn something from it and carry it forward. It can still sting, right? And it can still do something that leaves people in a less than good place. Sometimes legal losses are more painful than other legal losses, obviously. But can you tell our listeners first about a time in your practice of law where you experienced, a failure, a loss, a setback, something that didn't go your way, and how it affected you, but then also how you learned from it and how you carry that forward to help your future clients, current and future clients?
Yeah. I think you probably always learn more from the losses than you do the successes. And
because it stings.
It absolutely does. Yeah. I'll tell you one that was impactful, but also kind of funny. It was, I think, maybe the third case I took to trial as a defense attorney. And one of the things that you have to learn when you transition from being a district attorney to a defense attorney is to stop calling yourself the people, first of all, right? Because you're the defense now, right? I mean, that's a hard habit to break. I was a DA for 6 years. But anyway, it's like my third trial as a defense attorney, and my first two trials have been successful. And it's kind of a weird case. We had a really good defense, but it was like an animal abuse case, right? And it's all the way out in Garfield County, which is way out in the mountains, about 6 hours from where I'm at. Just got hooked up from a friend of a friend who needed some representation. So we ended up taking the case to trial, and did the whole case. And I thought for sure that we were going to get not guilty verdicts. And the jury came in and they walked my guy in half the counts, but they convicted him on half. And one of the things about doing defense work is that you can't, if you're going to have a win in a case, you basically have to run the board. Yeah. Right. Because the penalties are so high that even one charge, even if you walk them on everything else, one charge, if it's a high enough level charge, judges don't exactly forget all the evidence they heard during the case. Right. And a lot of times, somebody ends up getting the same punishment they would have, they got convicted of everything. So you kind of got to win everything. And so my client got convicted about half the charges. And it wasn't an overly harsh sentence. He got probation. He had to do a couple of days in work release. But I think the lesson I learned from that is that people like dogs more than people. And that's an important takeaway, because if this was a person-on-person crime, I promise you I would have won that one. But if it's animals, you're going to lose those every single day. So I think that was my lesson, was plea out the animal cases, try the person cases. That makes a big difference. But
also,
no, I mean,
don't let the prosecution come in playing like the Sarah McLachlan in the background.
Yeah. That really adds to it. They did have a video, and they played that on repeat through the entire trial. And I don't think it showed, what the DA was saying it showed, but you watch that thing like 100 times. Eventually, it's still hard not to come away. Yeah, exactly. So that was a learning experience. And every time you lose, you hopefully you remember something like that you hold on to that sting, and then you don't do that you're going to do something stupid in every trial you do. And so the only way you get better is doing more of them, figuring out what the stupid things are, and then avoiding those in the future. That's a hard lesson to learn, but the only way you learn them is by just doing trials.
Step on enough landmines and
yeah,
you either survive or you're out of business.
yeah, exactly.
or possibly needing someone to represent you. But
you'd never want to have your lawyer having another lawyer. That's a very bad situation to be
in. Okay, so let's do the flip side of that though. I'm sure you've had some successes, you've had some wins that you're very, very proud of. Tell us about one or two of those cases that they're kind of the feather in the cap, the things that you really are like, man, this went great, this went smashing. If I need to convince someone that I'm the guy to work with them, this is the story I'm going to tell them, right? I'm sure you've got a couple like that under your belt too.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, you ask a defense attorney about their successes. So, those are the ones that we tell at bars over and over again. I don't tell the stories of my losses. No, I will tell you this. So the most recent one I had was a trial we did about, I think 2, maybe 3 weeks ago. And it was my favorite trial I think I've done so far, because it was the quickest not guilty verdict I've ever gotten. It was a 5-minute not guilty verdict on a DUI case.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, which is significant because when the jury has to go back and deliberate, the first thing they have to do is they have to pick a foreperson, and then they have to fill out the jury forms, the verdict forms. So, it was just enough time for them to take a vote, and clearly everybody was in agreement. But it was a case we did up in Teller County, which is the 4th Judicial District has both El Paso County and Teller County, which is kind of a gambling town up in the mountains. And, they're a little bit more libertarian up there. My client, I don't know why they did this, but the police got some information from like a third party who was mad at my client and said that she'd been driving drunk. And so the cops like show up at her home, and they did the roadsides, like the sobriety test, right?
Yeah.
They did the roadsides in her living room after she'd been in her own house for like an hour, and she had taken her sleeping pills and that kind of stuff, and she's woken up and put through this stuff, and they charged her with the DUI. And it took us, I think, 6 months to get the case to trial. But I got to say in the closing argument that this is why roadsides are done on the roadside.
Yeah,
it's just one of the few times you can have a good turn of phrase that I think made a difference. So that was one of my, I guess, most recent and favorite wins. So I'm proud of that one.
That's kind of absurd. Was there a fallback or blowback on the officer that decided to go in and do this in her living room, or is
no?
That like, well, you're free, just go for it, or
hopefully he won't do it again. Right? I mean, you do. So one of the things that you can really tell if you've been doing criminal law long enough is the difference between an experienced law enforcement officer and an inexperienced law enforcement officer. It's like anything else, right? They have to do the job long enough to learn the right way to do it. And sometimes, I practice kind of all over Southern Colorado, and a lot of these rural counties we have, they don't have the budgets to really pay these officers, enough to make them stay. So the minute somebody gets 3 years under their belt, they just leave and they go to a bigger department. Yeah. And that's kind of the issue with that county in the mountain town up there, is that, nobody knows what they're doing because they don't have the, kind of the gray beards there to instruct the new guys. So the people with the seniority have maybe 5 years on. And so those mistakes just keep getting repeated. So I'm always very excited when I get a case in those counties, because I know there's going to be some significant mistakes I can exploit. But I do, you feel bad for the people who live in that community that are like, golly, man, I'm dealing with this thing again. And, if the cops would have just, not jumped to conclusions or done a bit more investigation, that kind of stuff. I'm always happy to recommend that my client takes the plea if the evidence is stacked against them. Yeah. Right. But if the cops are screwing up, then, we got to hold their feet to the fire and take the case to trial. And that's, so frankly, everybody's a little bit worse for wear in that case when cops aren't paid enough, they're not trained enough. And then at the end of the day, we end up having to take a lot more of these cases to trial. So, you kind of hope that in the future, the members of that community are recognizing where the fault is coming from.
This points out though that what you do is important. You really are a stopgap in a way. You prevent abuses in the system, or at least you correct them and hopefully can stand in and make that change happen over time, or at least minimize the amount of times the stupidity, does does
Yeah,
wind
yeah.
up happening. And maybe that's one of the most rewarding parts of your job. I have people ask me all the time, because like I know you talk to attorneys and whatnot, and people are always most interested in well, they're always interested in PI stuff because people just love a good injury story, but they're always interested in criminal defense and like how do they do it, right? Um, and share as whatever insights you want to share here, but I'll ask the question the way I often get it asked to me is how do they defend a guilty person with a good conscience, right? And I'm a firm believer that everyone gets their day in court. It's in the Constitution. You have the
Yeah.
right to. We've already talked about all this stuff, but what's I guess what's the hardest part about what you do? And are there cases where you're just like, I'm doing this only because of a sense of civic obligation, or do you approach every case with a certain mindset? Talk about that process, if that makes
Yeah.
sense.
No, I mean, that's a really good question. I get that a little bit too. I think though, part of the way it's never been an issue for me. And I think part of the reason is that um, if you've got a situation, and this doesn't always happen, right? Like you don't always know if your client's guilty or not. People don't just walk into my office and say, I'm guilty. Get me find a loophole or something like that. That's not how it works, right? A lot of times people don't even know if they're guilty. They're like, I got arrested. I had a fight with somebody. Does that qualify? Right. And we got to figure
Yeah.
out, well, were you acting in self-defense? Did you meet the mental stakes? There's two parts of your crime. You got to do something that's illegal, but then you also have to have a culpable mental state, is what we call it, meaning you either intended to do it, you did it recklessly, or you knowingly did it. And sometimes, you can do something that's stupid and reckless, right? But the DA's alleged that you did something intentionally, right? So you're not actually guilty of that crime. You might, be guilty of some lesser crime and that kind of stuff. So part of it is finding out, where the evidence actually is, and if somebody's actually guilty of the crime or not is kind of where you start. But the other part of it is, look, I mean, every once in a while, yeah, there's a smoking gun, right? I mean, my client absolutely did that. It is 100% guilty. But then you're defending the process, right? You're defending the Constitution, and I think people, don't really know this, how your rights came into existence, right? Your right to remain silent, your right to be free from having the cops, throw you down and search your car and that kind of stuff. All of those things came about because a guilty person, right? I mean, there are always guilty people. That's the base of our case law. A guilty person who did a crime, right, got either searched in violation of their constitutional rights or got interrogated in violation of their constitutional rights, and that's how the cops got the evidence. So that's how your rights came into existence. They're
Yeah.
built on the backs of these guilty people, and eventually some reviewing court goes, look, we know the guy's guilty, right? Fine, stipulated, but you still can't do this extra thing to get that evidence, because then that puts us all at risk, right?
Yeah.
Everybody's rights are built on that. So I think that's part of it. Is a lot of times I'll be doing a trial, and the DA might have a lot of evidence and that kind of stuff, and we're just keeping them honest. And the part that gets me passionate, even when I'm representing somebody who's absolutely guilty, is when the DA oversteps, right?
Mhm.
They say something that's clearly contrary to the evidence, or they try and pin on an extra charge that my guy didn't do because they're trying to get that extra sentence, or stack them up and that kind of stuff. So that's what I think. You can be passionate about every single case you have, but you got to understand why you're there. I love defending people that are innocent and didn't do anything wrong, but I also love protecting the rights of the people that are 100% guilty, because I know that's how my rights are protected.
Absolutely. I can appreciate that answer quite a bit. That's roughly the answer I've given in the past when people ask me that question, because that's roughly the answer I've gotten. But I think that you phrased it very, very nicely. So I appreciate that. I'm sure
You
people
got to
come
be
to
able
you
to
with,
defend yourself at the cocktail parties.
yeah. I'm sure people come to you with some misconceptions.
Uh-huh.
Maybe it's just, yeah, this guy will get me off of everything every time, 100% or whatnot. But what are some of the biggest misconceptions that people bring into your office when they come to you?
I'll tell you the biggest one, and I think maybe there needs to be some more outreach about this because people don't really understand it, right? So here's the biggest misconception I see. They didn't read me my Miranda rights. Does that mean the case gets thrown out? I have to answer some form of that question with almost every client I have. And here's why it's a misconception. So the Miranda rights exist to protect somebody from two things: a custodial interrogation, right? So you have to be in custody, meaning your freedom of movement is restricted. You're handcuffed in the back of a police car. There's a cop that's, got a gun drawn down on you, or you're in the substation or something like that, right? And interrogation, meaning they're asking you questions designed to elicit an incriminating response. Then before they can do that, they have to read you Miranda rights, right? And that makes sense, right? Okay, because so the cops are going, all right, we've got this person. We think they're, the suspect. We're going to try and get our evidence. So let's interrogate them. We're not going to let them leave, right? Let's interrogate them and let's get the evidence we need for prosecution. So that's why Miranda exists. It doesn't protect police officers from having a conversation with you. So, the cops get called, and this happens, I do a lot of domestic violence cases, right? So cops are always being called out to a home, an apartment complex, whatever, and they separate both people and they go, what happened, right? And then somebody gets arrested, because in Colorado, if it's a domestic violence charge, somebody gets arrested every time. We have mandatory arrest law here, right?
Really?
And so, yeah, I'll talk to you more about that. That's a real issue. But somebody's always going to jail if it's a domestic violence allegation. But at the end of it, so somebody gets arrested and then they go, well, the cops never read me my rights. If they're just asking what happened and then you stupidly say, I did this or whatever, well, then, they're going to be able to use that statement against you at trial. That statement's not going to be thrown out. Now, if they've got you, in the jail cell and that kind of stuff, and they're saying, didn't you hit, this person or whatever, and then you make that statement, then that would be subject to suppression. The case doesn't actually get dismissed most of the time. There's, if a cop's acting really egregiously, maybe, but most of the time what happens is just that statement gets suppressed, meaning the DA can't use that statement that was obtained in violation of your rights later on. But they can use any statements, early on in the case before they made that arrest decision.
Gotcha. Tell me about mandatory arrest laws, because that's something I'm not familiar with. I live in Kansas. I don't think that's the case here. I've never been involved in a domestic dispute, but literally, if they get called out definitively, someone gets arrested, or even if the thing is subsided, or tell me about that.
They still have to have probable cause, right, to make an arrest. But the way that the law in Colorado works is it's a mandatory arrest law for domestic violence. So if a police officer makes a determination that a domestic violence incident occurred, right, then somebody is going to get arrested. They can't, they don't have, law enforcement discretion like they do in every other case, right? They have to make that arrest. The idea behind it is that, and this is partially true, right, is that, domestic violence are high risk situations. And if you don't put an end to, violence immediately or separate the parties and that kind of stuff, then the lethality risk increases. So that's why the legislature passed the laws. But it's taken, it's gone to like an absurd degree where, I remember, I think one of the silliest cases I had, I was a district attorney, and there was a couple in their 80s, and they were arguing, and like they were making dinner, and this lady just picked up the steak that they were going to cook on the grill, and she slapped her husband with it. And, they're just honest people, right? The cops show up and they're like, yeah, this is what happened. So she got taken to jail, and they don't set your bond that night. So you get taken to jail. You have to sit in jail for at least an evening, multiple if you get arrested on the weekend. And then you've got to appear in front of a judge. You have to say, yes, I acknowledge this protection order, which gets put in place anytime there's a domestic violence charge. And only then can the judge set a bond in your case. So if there's a domestic violence allegation, you're always doing at least one day in jail, even if you have no criminal history and you're getting arrested. So, I think that's a problem.
I feel like the law is there to protect people, to be sure. And there's probably definitively times when arresting somebody would make sense, but I could definitely see that, again, going to extremes and just being absurd at the end of the day. That seems like an absurdity in the law. I know that there's when we think of domestic violence, we think of men abusing women
Yeah.
as a general rule, and that probably is still the majority of it.
Mhm.
But I know that women do abuse men as well.
Yeah.
I'm curious if you're aware of whether or not it's happened that the man is called on the woman and still wound up him being arrested or something.
Sure.
Does that
Mhm.
that happen just because there's a bias even in the system that, well, he's the guy, so he's the aggressor? Or
Yeah, I mean, certainly the optics are going to play into that, right? And you got to think too, the cops doing this, they're line cops, right? They're the guys on the beat getting called out to these different cases. Most of the domestic violence cases that they're seeing are men on women violence, right?
Mhm.
Well, what ends up happening then is you get these preconceptions that it's always the guy that's, perpetrating the domestic violence. It becomes a lot more complicated when the other party in the relationship has an incentive to get the police involved. So we see this all the time when there's like a custody case that's ongoing. They've had a fine marriage, police have never been involved, but all of a sudden we're getting divorced, and there's issues over custody. So now, wife is calling the police on husband, try and get him arrested, and use that in the divorce case and that kind of stuff. So, yeah, I mean that can absolutely happen, and there have been cases where I've represented. I have a number of cases right now, actually, where I'm representing, females who are accused of domestic violence. So, they do get arrested, and that can happen. It would just be better if there was a more thorough investigation done in a lot of these cases.
Yeah.
So, cops don't, they're going from call to call, right?
Yeah.
And, there is a real issue with response time. Actually, Colorado Springs has the local police department has a great, got some kudos on response time. I don't know if you heard about that Club Q shooting that happened. You hear
Yeah.
about that?
Yeah.
Their response time was like under a minute. It was.
I do remember hearing exactly that. I remember hearing that they were there
Yeah.
very quickly.
Yeah, so they're actually doing a really good job on this now. It's something that they've been, and you try and give credit to the police departments when they're doing things properly, because I don't think enough people do.
Yeah.
But yeah, so they worked. They were not great initially. I think at some point they had like a 17-minute response time, but they really worked on that. So that's been huge recently. But yeah, I mean, for a while, you got cops running from one case to another, trying to keep that response time down. Well, that means that they're making decisions about who's the perpetrator in whatever situation without really doing investigation, right? I mean, it's not, a lot of times everybody's got cameras in their house now and that kind of stuff. They never check the cameras. A lot of times they're not really doing an interview with the other person. So sometimes the person who calls is the first person who does an interview with the cops, and then they're coming at it with this kind of preconceived bias that, well, primacy and recency, right? Like, so the first thing that I heard is the thing that I'm most likely to believe. So they're interviewing the second person, and they're just, it's a lot easier for them to take down their story because they weren't the first person through the door. So I would appreciate, I think, a bit more investigation in a lot of these cases. I think it would prevent a lot of people from getting wrongfully arrested. But, it's a balance that every law enforcement agency has to make. I'm there when they don't do that, right? When they don't do a thorough investigation, I'm there to point out all the things that they could have done, should have done, and didn't do.
Are you ever brought in, just out of curiosity, when someone is doing like a divorce case and this sort of thing happens, and like, do you work with divorce attorneys ever, or you just you take care of this side and then the chips fall where they may on the other side, or how does that play out?
Yeah, so I did divorce, as a small part of my practice for, I think, like the first 2 years during COVID. Because those cases were actually still going well. The criminal defense cases were just
arguably they were spiking even, right?
Yeah, actually. So, so I got to know a good portion of the domestic bar that way. So I've got a number of people that, if they're getting a divorce and that kind of stuff, and they hire me in a criminal case, I'll refer them out to divorce lawyers that I know. And that's really helpful, actually, because you have that open line of communication with an attorney that and so you can have that conversation about, okay, if we do this plea, how's that going to affect your domestic case, or do we need to go to trial, and how's that going to translate, and vice versa. One of the things that's probably the other major concern I have in our law, and this is the only thing I really consider to be a true loophole, right? Everybody talks about criminal defense stuff being a loophole. It's really not, right? I mean, it's made to keep police and law enforcement honest, but when we do motions and that kind of stuff and get cases dismissed. But this is one that I've yet to figure out why this exists. So if you're there's a process for civil protection orders, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you can get like a restraining order against somebody. And so if you go out and take out a protection order, well, the first protection order is just done ex parte, meaning that there's no defense attorney in there, right? It's just you and the judge. And so they can grant you a temporary protection order, and you can serve that on the other person that you took out the protection order for. And this happens a lot in domestic cases. And then that becomes valid for 14 days until the permanent protection order date comes around. And then that's when, somebody like me comes in and defends the person that they're trying to get the protection order out. And so then we can play defense, right? We can bring up the issues in their petition for protection order, lies, inconsistencies, that kind of stuff. But the magistrate never really learns about that, right? Because it's just a magistrate talking to the petitioner. Well, what happens, and this is where it ties into divorce stuff, is that it seems that this is widely known, because I've seen this happen again and again, is that somebody who decides that they're going to get a divorce, right, will take a protection order out against their spouse. And normally it's a female against a male, but it could be either. So they'll go with the protection order. They'll have their spouse serve with the protection order. Great. So spouse gets kicked out of the marital home, right? They change the locks on the marital home, move the property out. So now you're out of the home until you get to what's called temporary orders. In a domestic relations case, there's no court orders about custody. So what that means, and that takes about 3 months to get around to temporary orders, right?
Yeah.
So what that means is that, if somebody takes out a protection order, then the person's kicked out of the house. They don't really have any contact with their kids because their kids are in the house with the spouse, and they can't go and, get into the house and that kind of stuff. And so then, about 3 months goes by before they're able to get a parenting plan in place. Well, at that point, then the judge in the domestic case is going, well, hey, you haven't had parenting time with your kids in 3 months. I think we can't just go back to you having half parenting time. We got to work on building you back up to parenting time. Kids haven't seen you in that amount of time. So, it's a situation where somebody was perfectly fine one day, but, because they can take out this protection order and there's no defense to it. And I had this happen when I was doing divorce cases. I did maybe about 100 of them. And I think 5 cases. So it was about 5% of the time this happened. And then the party who took out the protection order never showed up for the permanent hearing. So they're not going to defend the protection order because they know that what they're saying isn't true, right? Yeah. But they're leveraging this, protection order that's done in the dark, to get them an upper hand in the case. So, and then, there's no real punishment for it. So that's a real loophole. And I don't have an answer for that one. Maybe next time you talk to a divorce attorney, you can ask them what they think would be a better way to reform that. I don't really blame anybody involved in that process except the petition and the protection, right? The magistrate doesn't know, and, nobody else is able to get involved at that point. So I don't know what's a good solution for it, but I think it's a real issue.
Maybe even just like a punishment if you don't show up and defend yourself. I mean, there's something to be said for declaring it, showing up, and it being ruled against you. But if you don't even show up because you're just like not even invested in it, you were just using it as attack collateral or whatever, like that's just absurd.
It's a very dark tactic, but I've seen it used a lot.
Oh my gosh. All right. So, well, let me first off say this has been a wonderful discussion. I really enjoyed it. I feel like I'm learning a lot and really going deep into some of these issues. I don't want to take up too much of your time. I know that you're a professional. You've got stuff to do, so we'll start wrapping this up in a minute. So we'll go to the fun questions here in just a moment, and those fun questions, just to reframe for you as you can prep for them, and then we're going to go jump over to your site and read from our last sponsor. If we're able to travel through time and go back and meet 2 or 3 years ago, even we're back in 2016, a young Austin, and give him some advice other than, of course, buy a lot of Bitcoin. Trust me, hold till 80K or whatever. But give yourself some advice, and of course, by extension, some other law student who's fresh out of law school. What advice would you give yourself? And then also, I'm going to give you the magic pen. Now, maybe we just discovered at least one area where using the magic pen could come in handy. But as always, the magic pen gives you the ability to strike a law from the books, edit a law that's on the books, or add a law to the books that's not already there. And I always say this can be a law with nationwide sweeping ramifications, or it can be that stupid law that forces you to fill out a form in triplicate like 15 times a week, and you just hate doing it, right? So think on that for a minute, about what law you would change and what advice you'd give yourself. And while you're pondering, We're going to jump back over, take a look at your site. Again, this is the luxlawfirm.com. I'm talking with Austin Lux. He runs the eponymous firm that bears his name, which that's kind of redundant to even say it that way, but whatever. You can always visit him online, link down below in the description. But that's the Lux Law Firm, the luxlawfirm.com. I don't know why I keep alighting over the law there. You can also give him a call.
I can throw one more L in there.
Yeah, phone number in the description below, but that's 719-496-2177. He does offer a free case evaluation. So if you have any kind of criminal charges against you and you need an attorney to talk to, he does all sorts of things: domestic violence, drug crimes, marijuana convictions, felony defense, DUI, DWI, expungement, sealing, etc. Definitely seems like he'd be a great resource. Lots of great reviews. I was showing these earlier while you were talking. I was going through your Google reviews. You've got 37 reviews and a solid 5-star rating. That's always some of the things I like to see. So very, very good stuff. Link in the description to all this below. We're going to jump over and read from our last sponsor, and that is Rank with News. If there was a guaranteed way to get your law firm or business featured in major national publications like Yahoo News, Forbes, Bloomberg, AP News, Reuters, etc., and to see those articles rank locally, sometimes in under 8 hours, for major competitive keywords that people were actually looking for, what else would you need to know? Rank with News is simply the most powerful way to hit page 1 in under 2 weeks safely, organically, and permanently. This is guaranteed SEO, or search engine optimization, on steroids, ranking quickly and sticking indefinitely. Visit rankwith.news to learn more and to book a time to speak with one of the specialists about featuring your firm or your business in major national 8-figure traffic sites that can launch you to page 1 of Google in under a matter of less than a day sometimes, but definitely in under 30 days. And in fact, spoiler alert, this is my company, and that's me right there. So visit rankwith.news.com, and you can actually book a time to talk with yours truly. Time is filling up before the holidays, but there will be more time once we get to, obviously, the new year, and we can figure out a way and a roadmap forward to take your business from this to this. Visit rankwith.news. All right, magical pen time, Austin. I'm going to hand you the pen, and as soon as I hand it to you, you are warped back in time to a younger Austin, fresh out of law school, and you're able to give yourself, some good strategic advice going into your practice of law. What advice are you going to give yourself, and why?
I think it's great. Well, I'll tell you something that I think I did do, but I think it was the most important thing that any lawyer who wants to go into criminal law should do. And that's, you got to do as many trials as you can. That's the trial work is different than everything else that any other lawyer does. And you can't become good at it by reading a book. It doesn't exist. The ability to talk to a jury only comes from talking to juries. So you have to do as many trials as you possibly can. And, frankly, the only way to do that is to start off at either a DA's office or public defender's office. Those are the only two places that are going to put you on the in a courtroom on the ground running and doing trial work. Everywhere else, they don't get enough trials, or it's the senior partners there that are doing the trials. So once I was doing 2 months out of every year in trial, then that's when I actually felt comfortable leaving and starting my own practice. Because I knew I could do that. I knew I could talk to a jury. I knew I could handle whatever case was brought before me. I think that's the most important thing. Now, if I were to talk to myself specifically, take a business class, take some golf lessons. Those are the things I didn't know, when I started my practice, and that was the learning curve. Was learning about how to do all the things that come in, owning a small business and that kind of stuff that they don't teach in law school. And then,
got to work on
really
that
tired
slice.
Yeah, I'm really tired of hitting people on the other fairway. So yeah, that's I think those, but doing trials is definitely the most important thing if you want to be a litigator.
There you go. Let me ask you this related question. Have you ever sat on a jury, or you've been called for jury duty, or do you find now that you're an attorney, you're immune from jury duty?
Yeah, I'll never be on a jury. And I know that because I would never let another attorney on my jury. Ever. even if it was Jerry Spence, he's not getting on my jury. Yeah, you just you don't want lawyers on your jury. You never know what they're going to do. I was called for jury duty a couple times. I never made it to the courthouse, though. They always canceled my jury service beforehand. So I'm obviously, I would love to do that. I'm interested and passionate about this, but maybe in a products manufacturing case or something like that I know nothing about. Maybe there's a slim chance, but I was talking to I had a lawyer on one of my juries. He was a JAG lawyer, and I asked him. I was just doing jury selection, and I asked him. I said, "Yeah, would you keep a lawyer on your jury?" In front of everybody else, whatever. He goes, "Hell no." I was like, so when I kick you, it's not personal. Yeah, I don't think that's going to be in the cards for me.
That's awesome. I've been called twice, never had a chance to serve. And the first time I got called, I didn't realize it. They called us and they have like a 1 week turnaround time where you have to notify them. And this was right at the holidays, about this time of year. So we had just left. My wife's from Pennsylvania. We live in Kansas. And so it's like 1,000 miles to her dad's house. We spend like 2 weeks out there, cabin in the woods at Christmas. Absolutely gorgeous. Come back.
Great.
I find myself with a letter that I'm in contempt of court.
Oh, great. That's terrifying. Drain the blood right out of your face.
Like what? I also, I think it was that same year, I also came back and the IRS sent me a letter saying I owed them like $80,000. I'm like, what? And it was just.
I'd go back to that cabin, man. I'd shut the door.
I thought about it. Again. it was something that just wasn't deducted correctly. It was a clerical error, but it took 2 years, and it turned out they owed me like $5,000. But they're like, we're just going to go ahead and keep that money because of the taxes accrued on the money we thought that you owed us, or the interest accrued on the money we thought. It was so dumb, but I just let it go at that point. It was just so dumb. So anyway,
that's a stunning reversal, though. I'm impressed.
I don't do my own taxes much anymore these days because it's just a pain in the butt.
Yeah.
Okay, question number 2 though. Magic pen time. I'm going to give you the pen, and again, with this pen, you can strike a law from the books, you can edit a law that's on the books, or you can add a new law that you think needs to be there. What are you going to change and why, Austin?
Yeah, that's easily the mandatory arrest law for DV cases. I do it like we do every other case. The cops get to decide if this is a case where they should issue a summons or if they should do an arrest. They're the people on the ground. They're the people with the most information. Sometimes it's just, we were having a fight, go, to your friend's house and we resolve it tomorrow. That's the way it was for years and years and years.
And I think it was,
yeah. And it really was, I think it was a lot of lawmakers trying to do something good, but without really the information, having not been involved in that system before. So I give it back to the people on the ground.
The road to something paved with good intentions, as they say.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Well, Austin, I want to thank you very much for taking time to talk with me and my listeners today. As always, I do like to give my guest the final word. Do you have any parting thoughts of words of wisdom or anything you'd like to leave our listeners with before we wrap up?
Oh, don't talk to the cops if they're investigating you for a crime. Whatever you say is going to be worse. So yeah, talk to an attorney first. That's it, man.
Shut your lips. Yeah. Call your attorney. There you go. Well, Austin, again, thank you very much. I appreciate it. A great conversation. I think I learned actually a lot. One of my favorite things about this podcast is getting to learn things. And I feel like I learned more in this call than I do in sometimes 2 or 3 calls combined. So, or podcasts combined.
That's high praise.
I appreciate that. Absolutely. For those of you listening, this has been The Attorney Post, and I've been chatting with Austin Lux of the eponymous law firm that bears his name, as redundant as it is, the Lux Law Firm. That's theluxlawfirm.com. Link in the description down below. As always, though we are talking about legal issues, this podcast does not constitute legal advice. If you have a legal issue, you should always seek the advice of a competent attorney in the area who focuses on the matter you need help with. Obviously, if you live in Colorado Springs, you've got a criminal issue. I think Austin seems like he's got a great head on his shoulders and would be a wonderful resource. Again, visit theluxlawfirm.com or give him a phone call, number down in the description as well. I can confidently say he seems like he'd be a wonderful resource. And again, he does do free consultations, so you can at least figure out what your rights are. Because as I always say, if you don't know your rights, you don't have any. If you're watching this on YouTube, we appreciate a like, a subscribe, and a share. If you are watching this or listening to this on any of the other podcast repositories, whether that's Amazon, Audible, Stitcher, Spotify, whatever it happens to be, feel free to like us, review us, whatever they let you do there as well. It helps the channel grow. And until next time, remember, as I just said, if you don't know your rights, you don't have any. Thanks for listening, guys, and until next time.